And one participant asked me, now, why does the Gita ask us to surrender to God? I didn't know that I was fighting with God. Why do I have to surrender to Him? So for most people, the idea of surrender conveys a martial imagery, the image of war, that two people are fighting and then one of them surrenders, raises the white flag of surrender. But devotional surrender is very different from martial surrender in two primary ways, in the cause and in the result. In terms of cause, when there is martial surrender, it is because one army is just not able to fight. So it's a helpless acceptance of defeat. But in bhakti, when there is surrender, it is not out of helpless, it is not a helpless acceptance. It is a voluntary offering of oneself to one's object of love. So for example, when one person loves another person, they may say, your wish is my command. That is an expression of surrender. So martial surrender is out of helplessness, whereas devotional surrender is out of, you could say, lovefulness or joyfulness coming from love. And the result of martial surrender is not very pleasant. Once the army surrenders, they're completely dependent on, their fate is dependent on the way the conqueror deals with them. But in devotional surrender, when we surrender to the Lord, it brings us closer to Him in a very, very sweet and uplifting bond of love. So now when we surrender to God, what does it mean? What does surrendering mean? How do we surrender? So we discussed till now why we surrender as an expression of love. And what happens when we surrender? That our love becomes deeper and sweeter. So now, because God is the supreme person, love with Him is different from love with any other person. So to understand how we can express our love through surrender, let's consider two divisions. There are things in our control and things which are out of our control. So for the things that are out of our control, in one sense, both of these things that are in our control are also under God's control, but He has given us that area of control. And things that are beyond our control are also under God's control, although He may have given that area of control to certain people. So for the things that are beyond our control, we surrender by acceptance and dependence. So this mode of surrender is seen in the Bible when Jesus foresees that He is going to be betrayed and killed the next day. At that time, He says, "O Father, let thy will be done." In the Bhakti tradition, this surrender is demonstrated through Draupadi. When she was being dishonored and disrobed, she just raised her hands in helpless dependence. So sometimes surrender is thought to be only this, like acceptance and dependence. So the underlying theme is that even if something terrible is happening, I won't resent it. I accept it as your will. And I will depend on you, O Lord, for things to work out well. However, there is another very important aspect to surrender, and that is described at the end of the Bhagavad Gita. So towards the end of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja. He says, just surrender to me. And Arjuna says, yes, I will surrender. But Arjuna does not raise his arms in helpless dependence. Arjuna raises his arms. Arms means weapons. He raises his arrow, in his bow and arrow, in readiness to fight. So how is this surrender? So to understand how this is surrender, we need to look at the other part. We look at the things that are beyond our control. Now we look at the things that are in our control. So for the things that are in our control, We surrender by diligence, by doing the best that we can. So that's why Arjuna's statement at the end of the Gita in 18.73 is not similar to Jesus' statement. It is different. So whereas Jesus says, "Oh God, let thy will be done," Arjuna says, "Oh God, I will do thy will." So if we consider this circle, what is in our not our control, we accept what is happening as God's will. But for what is in our control, we do our duty, we do our responsibility diligently and see that as a way of doing God's will. So long ago, when about 25 years ago, when I started speaking on bhakti, I was given 10 guidelines of how to speak devotionally by one of my mentors. And the last guideline was depend on Krishna. But it was followed by in bracket, but only after you have prepared for the class. That means even if I am speaking a class on surrender, there is something, surrender and dependence on Krishna, still there is something in my control. And that is how I organize my thoughts, how I articulate them, in what sequence, how I structure them. And for this, I need diligence. I need to be carefully preparing. Now, after I finish the class, when the audience asks questions, I can't control what questions they are going to ask. And I can't be sure that I will know the answers. For that, I need to have dependence on Krishna. So that's why surrender has these, is like a, if you consider pendulum, only dependence or only diligence, both will be unstable. But the middle of the pendulum is a balance of diligence and dependence. And we see this in when surrender is like the dynamic dance between diligence and dependence. And this is seen in the song that Srila Prabhupada wrote when he came to America and he was seeing the American coastline. That song is called Markine Bhagavad Dharma, teaching Bhagavad Dharma. So Prabhupada says in that song, "Nachao, nachao, Prabhu, nachao se mate." My dear Lord, make me dance. Just like a puppet master makes a puppet dance, make me dance. So here Prabhupada is expressing dependence on Krishna. He doesn't know what he's going to encounter when he comes to America. He says, "I'll accept your will. Make me dance according to your will, O Lord." But when we see, when Prabhupada actually came to America and anyone came to meet him in the early days, 1965, 66, 67, when there were not so many devotees in the Krishna consciousness movement, the devotees who met Prabhupada, they got such personal and special attention from Prabhupada. So when a person would come to meet him, Prabhupada exhibited great diligence in taking care of that person, answering their questions, and providing them all facilities possible for growing spiritually. So, we can pray to Prabhupada and Krishna that we also learn to surrender in this dynamic dance, accepting and depending for things beyond our control, and being diligent and accepting responsibility for the things that are in our control. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna wanted Arjuna to help in establishing dharma, in establishing social order. And that's why Arjuna didn't say just raise his hands. He raised his arms. "Yes, Krishna, I will assist you." So on the battlefield of Kurukshetra was the time for diligence, not dependence. So, and last point I will make, and then we can have some questions. That when we have to surrender, it is not so easy always to know what is in our control and what is not in our control. Like say if we have a small child, then we may want to take care of that child in a mood of devotion and service and surrender to Krishna. So at that time, we have to have diligence. Yes, and make sure that no strangers come and talk with the child, nobody threatens the child doesn't eat anything harmful, play with something dangerous. So that is the time for diligence. But when that same child becomes a teenager or becomes a young adult, at that time, we can't control and protect that child in the same way. So at that time, we surrender by dependence. Krishna, he is your child. You please take care of him now. So if when the child is a small baby and the baby is crying, and the parents say, okay, we depend on Krishna. If it is Krishna's will, let the baby cry, let the baby cry. That will be foolishness. No, that is a time for diligence. But when the child has become a young adult, at that time, if we try to control the child, I'll protect you from all possible dangers. No, don't play with these friends. Don't go to this place. Don't go to that place. They will rebel against us, and the relationship can get destroyed. So that is not the time for diligence. That is more for dependence. So surrender doesn't mean giving up our intelligence. It means using our intelligence to know when to surrender through diligence and when through dependence. If Krishna had wanted us to give up our intelligence in the name of surrender, then he could have finished the whole Bhagavad Gita in 7 words. Krishna could have told Arjuna, I am God, surrender to me, fight. Bhagavad Gita over. But Krishna doesn't do that. He goes through a systematic process of ethical reasoning based on philosophical analysis. Because Krishna doesn't want Arjuna to reject his intelligence. Krishna wants Arjuna to refine his intelligence. And that is what the Bhagavad Gita does. And that is the difference between education and indoctrination. So education teaches us how to think. Indoctrination teaches what to think. What the Gita offers as surrender is education to strengthen our intelligence and our decision-making capacity, not indoctrination. So I'll summarize. I spoke 3 main points today. The first point was that devotional surrender and martial surrender are different in terms of their cause and the result. The second point was that surrender is expressed through 2 ways: dependence for the things that are not in our control and diligence for the things that are in our control. And third point was that surrender is not rejecting our intelligence, but it is refining our intelligence. How do you know when to surrender and when to act? So I would like to rephrase the question. It is more of how to surrender by depending and how to surrender by acting. It's both. We are always surrendering, but in different ways. So I mentioned one part of the decision making is intelligence. We use our intelligence to assess. Yeah, this is something which I think I can fix this with my abilities, with my track record. So in that sense, you can say surrender means to do what we can with what we have now. But sometimes there is practically very little we can do about a particular problem. So that's the time when we surrender by depending. So sometimes we may feel that with our intelligence, this is something within my control to fix. But when we try to fix it, it just escalates into such a big problem that it is no longer in our control. So somebody has some misunderstanding about us and we think, yes, I can clarify and resolve this. But when we try to clarify it, they become even angrier and they start launching a hate campaign against us. And whatever we try to do, it only seems to make them angrier. And that time we understand that, okay, this is not in my control. I did my part. Now let me depend on Krishna to change this person's heart or to deal with the situation. So there is intelligence and there is experience. Both are combined to help us decide what is in our control and what is not in our control. It's like, suppose some guest has come to our house and they have a big suitcase. And we think that, oh, I can't lift this. This is too big for me. So that is our intelligence telling us that this is beyond my control. But then we go there and try to lift it and we find it's mostly empty and it's not difficult to lift. So in that case, our experience, you could say, challenges and changes what our intelligence said. Or sometimes they have a small suitcase, but we try to lift it. It's so heavy. We ask, what do you have? You got stones inside this? So in that sense, intelligence and experience are not just sequential, they are cyclic. So intelligence informs experience and experience informs intelligence. And that is how we slowly come to a better and better understanding of where to surrender by depending and where to surrender by acting. That we have to be fully surrendered or fully unsurrendered. Even if we are able to 1% or 5%, 10% able to decide better when to let go of things and when to take hold of things. And that itself can change our life's quality for the better.